Okay, good evening. I am here with Lija Fisher. She's an author, a speaker, and she writes specifically for kids, which I absolutely love that aspect because I have some of those. But she writes adventure stories, which I have two boys, and so they absolutely love these. And so her books are called The Cryptid Catcher and The Cryptid Seeker, and it's a cryptid adventure series. We just started the books, and so I'm reading them to my son, as I was telling Leah earlier. And so, eh, I, what got you started in this?
Uh, I wish that I had some amazing beginning to getting into cryptozoology, but I
Right.
have to admit that it all started with Charlie Sheen.
Really?
About 10 years ago, I was reading an article in the newspaper about Charlie Sheen, and he had put together a hunting party to go to Alaska to find the otter man. And I thought, who is the otter man, and what does Charlie Sheen want with him?
I have
And
never heard of that in my life.
yes. And so I started researching the otter man and discovered that it was a cryptid in Alaska. And I thought, cryptid, I've never heard the word cryptid. And so I started doing a deep dive into cryptids and cryptozoology. And I was just astounded at how much information was out there. And I remember when I was a kid, I was super into myths and mythology.
Mhm.
And I thought, well, cryptids are kind of modern day myths. They're the modern
Yes.
day mythology.
Mhm.
And I didn't know a lot of kids' books that were written on cryptids and cryptozoology. So I
Right.
thought, let me try my hand at it. And
Yeah.
that was how it started.
Okay. Well, I'm very glad that you did. I have gone on Amazon, and because at first, I had already ordered your books, but I was like, okay, because these are for 8 years old and up, really. Um, I know that my son, this is a little bit advanced for him, which is why I'm reading it to him. But if he were to sit down and try to read this, it would be a little bit above his level. Just he's a slow reader. Math is his thing, not reading. He's obviously not related to me because I suck at math. Um, but I was looking for, so I had already ordered these because I do want him to read these on his own eventually. But I was looking around for other cryptid books for kids, and there really is nothing. There is nothing. I looked, there was like the ABCs of cryptozoology, stuff like that, but there was really um, nothing enjoyable for kids out there. There's not much at all except this
Yeah,
piece.
there really isn't. Yes,
Yeah.
I brought one book. Melissa Savage has a book on Bigfoot called
Okay.
Lemons, and it's about two
Okay.
best friends looking for Bigfoot.
Yeah.
Kelly Milner Halls has a whole book on cryptids where she describes like some of the world's most famous cryptids,
Okay. Yes, I
beard
did look at that
cryptids.
one. Yeah.
And then there's a book series from a few years ago, and it's called like Cryptid Hunters. So there's a few books out there, but yeah,
Mm-hmm.
definitely not as many
Yeah.
as like myth books, the whole
Right.
Percy
Yeah.
Jackson
Yes.
craze and whatnot.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll have to look at those. So I told you I bought one book. It's called Mothman Learns His ABCs, but it's more of a children's book, young. And so there's not a lot for kids who are getting into this. And so I will tell you, I have done, throughout the career of Night Callers Bigfoot Radio, we have done over 300 interviews. And so many of those interviews, when I asked them how they got started in this, they're like, I found a book in the library and it had Bigfoot in it and I couldn't believe it. And it piqued my curiosity and I was just obsessed after that, right? I cannot tell you how many interviews have started out that way. And so to me, these books, whenever I think of some kid like my son walking through the library and they see this weird thing and it's like, it's got these monsters on it. And it's like, what's a cryptid? And they pick it up and they take it home and they start reading it and their life has changed. And so that's what I picture this book doing, kind of like Harry Potter did for me. But that's what I picture some kids doing when they find these books. And I think that, so what you've done is amazing because these are going to launch little cryptid hunters into the world, which I think is so cool.
Yes, that is my plan. That is my ultimate goal.
Her master plan is to launch all
Yes,
kinds of cryptid hunters into the
yes.
world.
And yeah, and I go to schools and libraries and I do a
Mhm.
whole presentation on cryptozoology for kids.
Right.
And because cryptozoology offers so much to young kids. First of
Right.
all, for readers who love fantasy and
Mhm.
monsters and animals that might be real,
Right.
it's just such a great um, cryptids are just so wonderful for kids who enjoy that kind of
Right.
thing, but they may not know what cryptids are. They may
Right.
know Bigfoot or the Loch Ness Monster,
Yeah.
but they may not know, like, ooh, that's a cryptid and it might
Yeah.
actually exist.
Yes.
And cryptozoology opens kids up to science.
Mhm.
Lauren Coleman of the International Cryptozoology Center, he talks a lot about how cryptozoology can be a gateway science for
Mhm.
kids,
Yeah,
just like how
absolutely.
dinosaurs got kids wanting to be Indiana Jones,
Yes,
digging for the
yes.
next relic. Cryptozoology is kind of the new dinosaur, where
Right.
it's getting kids really interested in wanting to do zoology or oceanography or
Mhm.
something that can get them into the field,
Right.
proving the existence of these unknown animals.
Absolutely. That's so wonderful. That's so wonderfully stated. I love that. That really appeals to me, obviously. But um, I was telling you before we came on, I do a segment called Little Footers, the Next Generation, where I interview children. It started out as children of Bigfoot researchers, but now it's just kind of any child who's interested in this topic, and I want to hear what they think about it. And so, in doing that, I've also started filming my own children when we go out into nature and just kind of hearing what their thoughts are. And so, children glean a lot more from you than you think they do. They're like little sponges. And so, I was in Fouke, Arkansas last weekend and I found some impressions in the soil. And I actually found a trackway, but I didn't say anything. I just said, Adam, come look at this, my oldest. And he came and looked and he said, Mama, that's a footprint. He said, Look, there's the toes right here and you can see it. And I said, Yes, sir, that's true. And so I said, What do you do next? And he said, You look for the next footprint. And I said, You are correct. And so he knew you find the trackway and you mark it and everything. And he did everything correctly, except he was kind of like running up ahead. And, I was like, Oh my gosh, you're going to step on it. But, that was a learning opportunity for him to learn how to research appropriately, but also the children can learn how to use the scientific method. They can learn how to collect data and evidence. And I think that's fantastic to train them up from so young in this and train them up the right way, you know?
That's exactly right. And when sometimes I tell people you can use science to search for
Mhm.
Bigfoot, people are
Yes.
like, "What? What are you talking about?"
Yeah.
And I'm like, You would prove the existence of Bigfoot the way you would prove the existence of any new species. And
Yeah.
we still do find about 1 to 2 new mammals every year. So
Yes.
there are mammals walking this planet that we have not found.
Mhm.
And some scientists believe that we have found maybe 15% of all life on Earth. There are some scientists who say that we have only found 1.5% of all life that exists on the planet. So, the way you would prove the existence of any new species is
Yeah,
through the scientific method.
absolutely.
And how fun is it to teach
Yeah.
kids the
Yes.
scientific method by
Yes.
saying, we're looking for Bigfoot. Will we find
Right.
him? We don't know. We haven't
Right.
found him yet, but here's what you would do in order to discover him. And I think it's so thrilling and so exciting for kids.
Oh, absolutely. And you know how I approach children with it is that and how I advise any Bigfoot researchers that come into contact with children and they're going to be in the field or camping or whatever is that not only do they get to learn the scientific part of research, they get to learn nature safety, which is so important. And they get to learn about how to enjoy nature safely, right? So we have, you can wander into the woods and you're going to blunder through all kinds of things and step on snakes and whatever. But if you learn how to identify um, your surroundings, so plant life, your geography, your wildlife. You have to learn all of those things to research Bigfoot anyway. And when kids learn that, it helps them to become not only better researchers, but enjoy their surroundings in nature, which is so important. Um, but something I tell them is, you guys are the future of Bigfoot research. You guys are going to grow up and find Bigfoot and establish he exists. And what happens when we establish that Bigfoot exists? You then become conservationist, right? Or we are already are conservationist, but you're going to take all your research and turn it over and help to protect these animals that exist. So that's kind of how I spin it. But what I try to tell other Bigfoot researchers is like, you may think it's a hindrance to have a child in the field or something like that because it's not safe, but you can teach them how to safely research and you're training up the next generation. You know, it's not on us to prove it. Like, let's go ahead and start teaching the next generation how to prove it as well,
Yeah,
the correct way.
absolutely. And in terms of conservation, that's such an amazing point because many scientists say that we are actually in the middle of a mass extinction right now,
Mhm.
where we are losing 16,000 species every 24 hours to extinction. Now that's, plant, animal, bird,
Yeah,
insect, fish.
but
But
still.
but these are creatures of our planet that are going extinct every day, almost
Mhm.
20,000. And so if we can find a way to become conservationists and yeah, and train the next generation to have an interest in that through searching for Bigfoot. Again, it's
Yeah,
just so many positives in
yeah,
teaching kids to look for Bigfoot.
absolutely. It's a win-win for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. Um, and so you went through all of this research for your books on cryptids and you started fresh. Like you really didn't think anything about this. Um, so what would you say that after doing your research, are you sold on any of these? Like, I mean, did you come across research that you're like, yeah, this definitely could be a thing?
I really did, and I'm actually kind of embarrassed about my books because when I first got into cryptozoology, I didn't really honor the
Right.
legend and the evidence and the history of many of these cryptids. I
Mm-hmm.
just kind of thought, oh, they're animals we haven't found yet, so I can just make up whatever story I want.
Right.
And again, it was Lauren Coleman who really taught me, like, hey, these are not just stories that you can fiddle with, kind of like
Mhm.
Santa Claus. Santa Claus lives in the North Pole. You
Yeah.
can't say Santa Claus lives in the South Pole. He just doesn't. That's not
Yeah.
part of the legend. And so I'm kind of embarrassed going back and looking at my books because I just kind of made things up. But now that I have spent more time looking at the folklore of so many of these
Mhm.
animals, the stories, probably the main thing that interests me is with so many cryptids, they may just be a part of folklore, like they were created in order to be a morality tale for a society. But
Right.
there are many cryptids, Bigfoot included, that actually have a historical origin where something historical happened
Yes.
that makes them part of the historical record. So it's not just imagination and story. There was some kind of truth beginning to the
Absolutely.
tale. And I find that fascinating.
Absolutely.
And, and of course with Bigfoot, he's in so many pictographs. He's
Yes.
in the lore of Native Americans for the past 1,000 years.
Mhm.
And so for so many different stories, I was actually speaking to a folklorist about this recently, and he believes that there is a historical origin to Bigfoot just because
Mhm.
there are so many similar stories from so many dissimilar
Yes.
peoples in different geographies. And so to discount that is you really can't. It's part of
Mhm.
historical record. And I just find that
Absolutely.
amazing.
Oh, absolutely. It's very supportive. I find that too, whenever I encounter skeptics, I try to tell them, this wasn't something that just popped up when Patterson Gimlin came along. Like this is something that is throughout history. Before the 50s, I believe it was called the Hairy Wild Man, and before that it was pictures, and before that, but it's always been throughout history. This is not a new development.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, this is not something that yeah, that is a new thing based upon the Patterson Gimlin film. This has been back for over 1,000 years for
Hmm.
sure.
Well, I think that, using the cryptids in your book, you said you didn't know any better, but I think that it made it easy to read for the kids absorbing it. Obviously, this is not meant to be like a research, manual. So I think, it is fiction, but so I think that the work that you did and the research that you did to write these books, like I said, it's a launch pad for kids to read this and be like, I want to look into this. I want to do this, and be excited about it. So I think it's great, the work that you put in. And I love that you've personally grown from it and developed, more concrete evidence after that. You're like, okay, well, what I put in the book was this, but now I know this, this, and this. I think that's amazing. You've
Yeah,
grown from it.
absolutely. It's a way to honor the historical record of these creatures, and
Hmm.
to also honor the folk tales,
Absolutely. Yeah.
because folklore and folk tales are amazing pieces of history,
Yes.
and to learn to honor them, and and even to look at how cryptids have been used in different ways throughout history.
Hmm.
Like the snallygaster, from my understanding,
I
it
just
can.
now learned about that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that is
Yeah.
brand new to me. I actually, there's a girl, she owns the Snallygaster Museum, and she's a friend of mine now. And I'm like, this is a thing? There's so many weird ones.
Yes, I know.
But
I love
sorry.
talking about the snallygaster to kids because it's such a great name.
It
Um,
is.
but from what I've researched is, I heard, and I could be mistaken, but that the snallygaster legend began with the German immigrants coming over in
Mhm.
1799. But then the snallygaster, and I actually learned this from your friend who owns the Snallygaster Museum. I
Yes.
listened to a podcast she did. Or maybe she didn't tell this story, but I heard a story that the snallygaster, then during Prohibition,
Hmm.
in the woods, when people had stills that they were making moonshine with, when a still would explode, it would make a high pitched whining sound.
Hmm.
And so people said, oh, that's just the snallygaster screaming in the woods, as a way to hide
Oh,
their
wow.
illegal moonshine operation. So I'm just fascinated with, even if a cryptid has a historical origin, to then see how that story has been taken and changed
Right.
throughout history. It's amazing to me.
I know you said that, used for morality reasons, like don't get out of bed or else the boogeyman will get you, but also for that, I've actually heard that same thing applied to Bigfoot, and the Kentucky goblins. People did not want people in the woods, and so they said, there's some creature living in there, and it'll get you. But it was they just didn't want them going near their stills.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely. Right. And like,
it's just so funny to me.
and what if we are using this animal that does exist, but
Hmm.
then we've created these totally separate stories
Yes.
regarding them?
That is so
Yeah.
funny to me. I mean, it's just I guess I just don't put two and two together that it just I don't know, it makes me laugh because I can picture somebody saying, don't go on that property, there's dog man or something, but really there's just, illicit operations going on, that type
Right.
of thing.
Right.
Um,
Right.
I hadn't put that together until this show. So now that I
Yes.
know. But stupid people like me are like, ooh, I'm gonna go look at that. Like, yeah.
Right.
That would not work for me. But for normal people, I could see that being a thing. So I imagine that through all of your through authoring these books, through your speaking engagements, that you've had quite a few encounters told to you.
I really have, absolutely, and more so, by parents, of course, who
Right.
tell me their Bigfoot sightings, and it's really amazing because sometimes I'll get a story kind of unprompted.
Yeah.
Like when I was at the Texas Bigfoot conference in October,
Mhm.
after the conference was over, I did a boat tour down the bayou,
That
and
was beautiful.
yeah, oh, it's gorgeous. And there were about 12 other people on the boat. And I was on there by myself, and they all looked at me and they're like, well, what are you doing here? And I said,
Yeah.
oh, I just spoke at the Bigfoot conference. And this family started laughing and pointing at a guy on the boat. And they said he saw Bigfoot. And he was really, he started blushing. And I was like, well, what's
Yeah.
your story? And he was like, I don't know what I saw, but I looked out my window one morning and I live on a farm and I saw something bigger and faster than a man running across my field and it hurdled a 6 foot tall fence.
Oh
He
my
goes, I don't know what I saw, but it wasn't a man and it was faster and bigger than a man. And so when you start to hear these stories, all I can say is that people are seeing something,
absolutely.
they're seeing something. I had a gentleman tell me that he saw Bigfoot in Russia. And I was actually in a
Wow.
Bigfoot museum at the time, and there's a picture of Bigfoot behind me. And I was like, well, what did Bigfoot look like? And he pointed to the Bigfoot statue behind me and he goes, I swear it looked just like that. And he said, to this day, I don't know what I saw, but the only thing I can say is that I saw Bigfoot. And these
Mhm.
are people who didn't believe in Bigfoot, kind of don't believe in Bigfoot, but they're
Yeah,
like, I don't know how to wrap my mind around
absolutely.
what I witnessed.
Absolutely. It's not supposed to exist, so they just kind of your brain comes up with any possible thing it could be besides Bigfoot, but sometimes
Right.
there's just nothing besides what it is,
Right.
you know?
Absolutely.
Yeah. That's amazing that you had that experience there. I considered asking you, like, stopping by your booth when I was there and being like, "So, how many encounters have you racked up over here?" But, it was so crazy and busy, but I was sure that you got quite a few because your booth was so colorful and inviting and everything, and so, and then you were a speaker as well, so I figured people were gonna stop by and just, kind of tell you, about their experiences, especially after you spoke, so I'm sure you
Absolutely.
racked up a few.
Oh, yes. And then
So
people,
what would you say is the most unbelievable encounter you've heard that you believe to be true?
ooh, the most unbelievable encounter that I believe to be true.
Mhm.
Oh, this is really interesting.
That's okay, take your time.
I would have to say that it's the encounter that we heard about at the Texas Bigfoot conference,
Mhm.
where it was a family where the father at night came face to face with Bigfoot,
Absolutely.
and um, and then later Bigfoot returned and put his face up against
Mhm.
their glass door.
Yes.
And they brought the glass door in to the
Mhm.
conference. And so we got to see the smudge of Bigfoot's face on the
Yes.
glass. And the reason I think that it's true is that I spoke to, I believe, the wife of this family.
Mhm.
And I didn't know that this was before we heard the story.
Right.
But she heard my presentation about why it's possible that these cryptids were, that Bigfoot can be real.
Mhm.
And she came up to me and she was genuinely shaken. And
Oh.
she was like, I'm part of the family of the experience you're going to hear about later.
Mhm.
And she genuinely was like, I don't know what this is. I've never been to a Bigfoot conference, but I don't know what I saw and what happened. All I know is that it might have been Bigfoot. That's the only thing that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so when you hear these spectacular tales about Bigfoot coming right up to a man and then later coming
Yes.
back to the house and putting his face against the window, when you hear people talk about it, you can really get a sense of if it's true what they witnessed.
Absolutely.
And
Their behavior and emotions betray the integrity of their experience.
yeah,
Absolutely. Of their story, I guess.
yeah. And I myself, I haven't had a Bigfoot experience, but I did have a cryptid experience
Really?
where I live in Colorado and my boyfriend and I, this is about 2 years ago, were driving away from a hike that we did in the mountains. And we both looked to our left up a hill. And the only way that we could describe it is that we saw something that looked like it should be walking on two legs, but it
Mhm.
was leaning over and running on four. And
Mhm.
it was the fastest thing we had ever seen running. And it just darted off into the woods. And we both looked at each other and we said, what was that?
Yeah.
And we were like, that wasn't a bear. We don't have any wolves in Colorado. It was too big for a coyote. So it's like we went through
Right.
everything it could have possibly been. And we're like, that's we have no idea what we saw.
That
So,
gave me chills.
yeah,
It gave me chills whenever anything goes quadruped, it gives me chills and I don't know why. Like it just freaks me out.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, who knows? It could have been many, many different things. All I
Right.
know is that I've lived in Colorado for most of my life, over
Right.
40 years, and I had never seen anything like this before.
That's I mean, when you get that gut feeling of whatever I saw was not something that's supposed to be here or was not something that's normal, whenever you just sometimes, you can I had this conversation with my co-host for Planet Fear a while back. You can sit there and you can say, maybe it was a bear, maybe it was a coyote, maybe it was a wolf, maybe it was this. But if it like in the very end, you have to kind of go with your gut in that I saw what I saw and maybe I can't explain what it is, but I saw what I saw and it was not any of those things, you know.
Right. Absolutely. And I feel like that's what so many Bigfoot and cryptid sightings come down to,
Yes,
is it's
absolutely.
like, I don't know what I saw, but I saw what I saw.
Yes,
It's a very good way to
absolutely.
put it. Yeah.
And I always tell people, if you have a sighting or an experience, write it down as soon as you can afterwards, because within the next 24 to 48 hours, your brain is going to talk you out of what you saw or heard. And
Right.
I mean, you will be like, oh, no, 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 it wasn't 8 feet tall, it was 6 feet tall. And your brain is going to start talking you down and start talking you into normal terms. And, whatever you saw is what you saw. And so write it down. And that's what I always tell people, try to draw it if you can, that kind of thing, because your brain is going to try to talk you back to sanity and make
Yeah.
everything okay. That's what the brain does. So have you been out researching before?
I have not been out in the field, but I am doing
Okay.
my first field research in August. I am
Oh, good luck.
going, yes, through the Sasquatch Outpost in Colorado. I'm going to do
Right.
a 2-night camping trip
Oh, awesome.
with some Bigfooters, and they're going to take us out and hopefully see some eye shine and listen for tree
Mhm.
knocks and,
Yeah.
just have an experience.
Yeah, it's all about the experience for me personally. That's to me what it's all about is I have the people in my life who are dedicated to the science and the data and the evidence, and that's amazing. For me, it's the experience. It really is. I
Yeah.
do data collection while I'm out. I do my due diligence, but for me, it's having that experience. So I wish you luck, and I definitely hope that you have something while you're out there because part three, right?
Yes, exactly. Yes, I need more stories to write about.
Or material.
More
Um,
material.
that was my next question was, do you have any upcoming projects?
I currently am trying to sell 2 different books,
Okay.
and one book is about, UFOs landing in the Rocky Mountains and
Okay.
kids having to deal with that, uh,
Okay.
and so trying to sell that book, and I also just wrote, um, a nonfiction book proposal about Bigfoot
Mhm.
that I'm trying to sell that will be more of a nonfiction take for kids 8 through 12,
Okay.
to learn a little bit more about the science behind Bigfoot.
I love that. I
Yeah.
absolutely love that. I would love to promote you on that if that's okay, because that is, like I said, that's something near and dear to my heart. Kids are the next generation of Bigfoot researchers, and so we've got to train them up and educate them correctly on this. And I feel like all of the adults in the field now, we all just kind of like stumbled our way into Bigfoot research, right? But kids, we can bring them up learning about this so they already have the foundation and the research tactics and they're ready to go and find this thing, and come up with new things to do and apply new techniques to research.
Right.
um, I know whenever I talked to the Cub Scouts, there was a kid, he had a very long drawn out elaborate plan on how he was going to trap Bigfoot. And while his methods may have been like a little bit out there, he was in the right vein and the right energy to do this. And I was just so impressed because I'm like, this kid is going to grow up and find Bigfoot because he has the dedication, the passion, and he was using like engineering techniques to design this trap for Bigfoot. And it was really cool the way that he like brought it forward. And I'm like, these kids, they are the next generation. So I think if they had,
Absolutely.
like, a kid-friendly field guide, like you're kind of proposing, that's what it sounds like, that would be
Mhm.
phenomenal,
Yeah. Yeah.
phenomenal.
And, yeah, that's my dream is that, someday 40 years from now when I'm, an old grandma, I picture, some kid who might have heard me talk about cryptozoology and why
Mhm.
it's possible to find some of these legendary animals because we have found many of these cryptids.
Right.
The platypus was a cryptid before we found it, the manatee.
Mhm.
So many of these animals were considered animals of legend before
Right.
they were proven to truly exist. And my dream is to, have some scientist, the first one to find Bigfoot, say, I decided to get into Bigfoot research because I heard this author talk
Yeah.
about cryptozoology
Yes.
and maybe create this whole new generation of scientists um, who aren't just looking for Bigfoot, but along the way find many new species.
Absolutely, absolutely. Using those scientific methods that we talked about earlier, and using those research methods, um, go from, they're conservationists as well as researchers and find, document the flora and fauna and wildlife of their area. Yeah, I absolutely agree with that.
Right, absolutely. And it is fascinating how bit by bit, more scientists are putting their resources to finding Bigfoot.
Hmm.
I feel like scientists have been looking for the Loch Ness Monster for many years, using new environmental DNA techniques. For some reason, it seems really acceptable to search for Nessie
Yeah,
with scientific backing but Bigfoot kind of gets the short end of the
yeah,
stick, it's like, no, we can't put science
right.
behind Bigfoot. And I feel like now it's opening up a little bit more
Hmm.
of this acknowledgement of like, hey, there may be something out there. And if we put the weight of science behind it, maybe we could, turn a folklore into a real creature.
Real thing.
Yeah.
Absolutely. No, that's very well said. I think water cryptids, because the depth of our water, lakes and oceans, it's so mysterious. And so it's easier to offer a proposal that there might be something down there than every hunter, hiker tramps through these woods. How can there be anything out there? So
Yeah.
maybe that's why I'm not sure, but I don't know. I'd rather walk into the deep, dark woods with a potential Bigfoot out there than swim in a lake with some sea serpent, that just
Me
terrifies me.
too.
So
Me
it
too.
seems like, I don't know, because then you get into the argument of if Bigfoot is found, then forestry and tourism are impacted because there's no more logging, there's no more, camping or hiking in this area to protect the habitat and blah, blah, blah. And so you have those arguments. Whereas if there's a water cryptid, you could probably still fish and swim and, do everything you're doing on the water. So maybe that's why science backed that. It could be political. I don't know.
That's true. Yeah,
Just
because
thoughts.
we are low on the food chain when we're in the water. Like
Yeah.
we are not the
Yeah.
we are not the predators when we are in the water. We are
Mhm.
definitely the prey.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
yeah.
I'm going to Galveston next month, and so I just finished a book by another author on the plesiosaur or pliosaur, and he talks about this archaic water cryptid that just comes up and or I'm sorry, marine reptile and marine dinosaur, and it comes up and it eats people, all of that, and anyway, he kind of talks about how water cryptids today could possibly be like a mosasaur that never went extinct or something like that. That is terrifying. Oh my gosh. Like water cryptids to me, they're kind of downplayed, but that is 10 times more terrifying to me than any other cryptid in the woods,
Yeah.
truly. And that's
And
that's including Wendigo, Dogman, all of those water cryptids scare me way more than the others.
And one thing I learned recently about water cryptids is that, there are always all these theories about why don't we see as many water cryptids anymore? And there used to be a ton of Selkie sightings off the coast of Scotland.
Mhm.
Um, in like the mid 1800s. And I just researched this and I don't have the exact dates,
That's
but
fine.
there was like one in the mid 1800s, there were a ton of Selkie sightings. And then the first transatlantic steamship happened, the travel happened about 2 years after all of these sightings.
Hmm.
And then the main sighting of Selkies just stopped. And so
Oh.
there's some people who believe that once we started transatlantic travel, especially with all these different shipping lanes,
Hmm.
then the water cryptids could hear us. They could
Yeah.
now hear us traveling by boat. And so they knew to avoid all of these different shipping lanes. And again, like adding history into folklore, I find
Absolutely.
amazing.
Absolutely. I mean, it just fits in so well together. It's like, okay, here you have the supporting proof, that's like Bigfoot. I had somebody ask me, what's the evolution of Bigfoot? And I said, I believe that at one time they may have existed um co you know cohesively with man. This was my territory, this was your territory, whatever. I said, but when white man came along with his guns, I'm pretty sure they went into hiding because I mean, I would, and I have no scientific data to back this up, just history and reports and all of that. But I mean, at that point, any sane sentient creature would go and become elusive, right? They would go into hiding because you can't compete with the boom boom. So,
Right. Absolutely.
and then
Yeah.
technology comes along and we have it all over again. I can imagine they would know that we hold something in our hand that could threaten their existence. That's what I told um the people I was talking to this about. Like, Bigfoot, I believe, has the most extreme survival instinct. And so anything that threatens their existence, be it a gun, a camera, a car, a human, whatever, anything that threatens their existence, they're going to stay away from. So if you put a trail cam out in the woods, or a motion sensor on your house, or you walk into the woods with a gun, whatever, they're going to stay away from that. To me,
Yeah.
that's my opinion.
Absolutely. And one thing I love about learning more about Bigfoot is all those questions, like why haven't we found one? Why
Yeah.
haven't we found a body? What have you? I've discovered that those can all be very logically answered.
Hmm.
Like why don't we see Bigfoot a lot? And I realized that, again, I've grown up in Colorado and I did research that there are 7,000 mountain lions in Colorado.
Hmm.
I've never seen a single one.
Exactly.
And I am in the woods every weekend. I'm a hiker, skier, snowshoer,
Hmm.
mountain biker. So I am always in the forest and I've never once seen one of the 7,000 mountain lions in
Absolutely.
Colorado. And so if Bigfoot, I know some people make an estimate that it might be a couple of hundred
Hmm.
Bigfoot throughout the country.
Right.
Um, it's not so far off that you just wouldn't see one. And how the Pacific Northwest is the biggest rainforest in the one of the biggest rainforests in the world.
Hmm.
So when people are like, all of Bigfoot's habitat has been scoured, it really hasn't, you
No.
know? And final thing, like, why haven't we found a body?
Yeah.
Again, I'm in the mountains all the time. I've never once found a body of any animal because within 48 hours, any dead body is going to be scavenged and the
Yeah.
bones picked clean and
Yeah.
spread around. So, all of these, when the skeptics have these questions, I found it fascinating that there can always be an answer that really does scientifically make sense.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I give that same answer, is that, we never see mountain lion. Well, we never come across mountain lion carcasses or bear carcasses or, anything like that. Um, Apex predators, really, we really don't run across their carcasses ever.
Mhm.
And yeah, I mean, there's so many theories to that. They're cannibals, they eat their own, or even they're just animals and they don't want anything to go to waste. One of them dies and they're like, okay, well, they're gonna feed the rest of the group, or some they could be cannibals. We don't know. But I think you're pretty dead on that we have that population of mountain lions and they're so very seldom seen, you know?
Mhm. And I have seen plenty of bones scattered about, but
Yeah.
I've never grabbed a bone and said, this might be from Bigfoot.
Yeah.
Let me take it in, and do a
Yeah.
DNA
Yeah.
sample. So
Yeah.
it's possible that we have seen Bigfoot bones,
Mhm.
but it's just, again, nobody's gathering bones from the forest and
The
researching
men.
them, bringing them in, just a sack of bones.
Here, look, this is what is this? Oh, I can imagine if somebody has a biologist friend and they're just like, what's this one? What's this one? Or an anthropologist friend. um, I there's so many questions, and it seems like the more you learn about Bigfoot, or cryptids in general, but for me, Bigfoot, the more questions I have. It's like I'm a constant learner of all things Bigfoot. Our theories and our ideas change. They have to. To me, you can't have tunnel vision when you're trying to solve a mystery, right? It's just like police work. Like, you can't have tunnel vision. You have to use all the tools in your toolbox and broaden your perspective, and take in all the things to solve this mystery.
Absolutely, because I think that if you have a firm idea of what the answer is, all the research that you're doing is going to be in service to proving this idea you have, as opposed to looking at the data, looking at the evidence, and letting it guide you to what the
Yeah,
answer is. Even if
absolutely.
it's an answer that you're not too keen on, like, oh, I thought it was this, and now it's this.
Yeah,
But being curious for where you can be led instead of trying to make the evidence fit into this
yes.
predetermined idea of what you have.
Very well said. Very well
Mhm.
said. There's a lot to be said for that. We could probably go on for like 20 minutes on just that
Mhm.
alone, just because I feel like whenever you try to make this topic just this and it cannot venture off of this path, you're doing yourself a disservice as a researcher and as an investigator.
Right, absolutely. Because there is, I always tell kids that, we don't need to go to Mars to have the next frontier. The next frontier can be right here on Earth. And there are so many things that we still don't know.
Yeah.
And, in this day and age when kids can, pick up their iPhone and Google the answer to any question, I
Hmm.
like to tell them there are still some questions that we don't know the answers to. And that is why and even things like, I bring up the black hole in space, how we don't know what happens to the space-time continuum inside the event horizon. Time could speed up, time could slow down. Everything we know about physics could be upside down. And
Absolutely.
so just letting kids know, like, there's so much to still be discovered out there.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's so well said. I love that. Like, I'm just sitting here trying to decide, like, how can I tell my children that? But my children are used to my 8-year-old is a skeptic, and blatantly so. He tells me all the time, I ask him, is Bigfoot real? And he'll say, no, it's a myth. And at one point he was like, sorry, mama, it's not real. And I said, that's fine. I said, I would rather you believe because it was proven to you than believe because I told you to. And so he's so skeptical, and I absolutely love it. I want him to be skeptical, and I want him to learn how to research this and prove it to himself and then maybe the rest of the world. That's very important. So, I told the Cub Scouts the same thing, is do your research, do your due diligence, learn about this thing. You don't have to believe just because everybody else does. Look into it for yourself and decide if this is something that you think could be real, and then go look for it, put in the research.
Absolutely. I mean, even if you are a true Bigfoot believer, it is important to still be a skeptic when it comes to the evidence that is presented. You don't just want to take everything at face value. You want what is brought to you. You want to really research it and make sure that you are getting to the bottom of what the truth of the evidence is.
Yes, yeah, definitely. Um, oh, this has been such a wonderful interview, and I'm just like, I have, I mean, a million more questions, but mostly just about the book, which I know that probably none of the adults have read the book, but I'm thoroughly enjoying it just because it's educational, but it's also so fun. The way that you the way that you described the book was like an adventure cryptid series. And so I love that you went about it in that way, in that, so just for those who may not read the book, which, okay, look, it is a kid's book, but you can still read it. Okay. I'm
Yeah.
reading it right now and enjoying it. Basically the main character, his father passes away, and the dad is an archaeologist. But Clivo, the main character, finds out that his dad was actually a cryptid seeker or a cryptid hunter, which is so cool. And so I feel like my kids especially identify with that because their mom is a Bigfoot researcher. But like, how did you come up with that idea for it?
Um, this is now me putting my author cap on of my process of getting to the book, and it was actually a long, arduous process. Um, I was new to writing, so this was only the second book I ever wrote. And I
Oh, yeah.
first wrote it, I knew nothing about genre, I knew nothing about age groups. I just said, I want to write a story that I would read. And I
Right.
love adventures. So
Yes.
I actually first wrote that story for adults. I wrote a whole adult book
Oh.
about, I had just read a book about the history of the Delta Force. And so
Mhm.
I wrote a book for adults about a Delta Force soldier traveling the world hunting a dragon.
Okay.
And I miraculously got a literary agent out of it. And he was like, Leah, I love your writing, but no adult is going to read this. I'm like, what? I would totally read this. And he's like, no, you need to write this story, but for teenagers, for 13 to 18,
Yes.
which is called the young adult genre. I knew
Yeah.
nothing about the genre. So I just read a whole bunch of books in that genre and
Yeah.
realized, okay, you need to have romance, a lot of
Yeah.
angst in romance. So I changed it. I changed it to a story about a 16-year-old boy traveling the world looking for a dragon while wishing he had a girlfriend. And it was awful. And
Mhm.
my agent was like, this is pretty bad. And I'm like, yeah, let's go back to the adult version. He's like, no, no. Why don't you try to write it for 8 to 12-year-olds, which is considered the middle grade genre? And again, I knew nothing about that genre. So I just read a whole bunch of middle grade books, got a sense for what the voice was,
Mhm.
and then settled on the story about a 13-year-old boy traveling the world looking for cryptids in
Yeah.
order to protect them and save them from the bad guys.
Yes. I
So,
love it. I love the process of how you got there. So much trial and error, which was what I feel like cryptid research is, just on a whole nother level. But I love how you got there, and I love that you finally ended up with this series. The with the storyline that you finally settled on with Clivo.
yeah,
Um and I love that it is for kids, but there's enough there's enough in there for adults too that want to read it. So it's kind of like Shrek. Like Shrek is a kids movie, but there are things in there that adults get that is funny and enjoyable for us too, that makes it, kind of okay for adults to read too. Because I was reading some of it and there was just like some snarky comments from the parents of the best friend
mhm,
and stuff like that. And I was like, there's some sarcasm in there that my son probably wouldn't get, but I really got a chuckle out of it. So
yeah,
so I love the way you write. Really, it brought it out for children or for anyone else that wants to read it. Um, but I love that you're covering all the cryptids. That is just it's amazing to me. Um, I love that I can read this to my kids and it's clean and educational. So thank you so much for all the work that you've put into this series and your research as well.
yes. Well, thank you so much for having me. I learned
Yeah.
so much from, talking to people who have been out in the field like you and who
Yeah. Yeah.
have been researching Bigfoot and cryptids for so many years. So thank you for the work that you do.
Well, thank you. Again, thank you so much for coming on. I've already met you. but we didn't really get to chat when I met you. So I look forward to seeing you again this summer. And my boys are so excited to see you because, like I said, you are the J.K. Rowling for them. After reading these books, like they're so excited to see you because I told them last night, I said, hey, I said, we're reading this book. I said, the person that wrote this book, I said, we're going to get to see her this summer and hang out with her. And they are so excited about that. So they're probably going to pick your brain about all the cryptids.
I love it. I better bone up on my research.
Adam will definitely quiz you. He'll probably end up educating you on everything Bigfoot because that's what he does. So, but
I
thank
love
you
it.
so much for coming on today. I appreciate it so much. And keep up the good work on educating the masses, the younger masses, on becoming the next generation of Bigfoot researchers and cryptid researchers. That's amazing.
Absolutely. It's my goal. So thank
Yeah.
you.
All right. Thank you so much.